There is an image that the men who killed Ruben Um Nyobé never wanted you to see. The image of a corpse dragged through mud for miles, its face torn off by roots, its bones crushed by stones. The image of a body encased in a block of concrete so that it would disappear forever, so that no one would ever come to pay their respects, so that the myth would die with the man. They spent 3 years hunting him down in the equatorial forest. They burned entire villages, tortured thousands of people, dropped napalm on defenseless peasants. All for one man, a man who never held a weapon. And when they finally caught him, they thought it was all over. They were wrong. So who was Ruben Um Nyobé, really? Why was France, the great colonial power, so afraid of a trade unionist who became a nationalist leader, to the point of deploying the army, the air force, and the methods of the Indochina War to bring him down? Welcome to this podcast. From the podium of the United Nations, where he moved diplomats to tears, to the regroupment camps where thousands of Cameroonians were herded like cattle. A story of heroes, traitors, conspiracies, and bullets in the back. You're listening to Tarikoo, and this is the story of Ruben Um Nyobé. The equatorial forest stretches as far as the eye can see around the village of Song Pek. It is April 10th, 1913. In a mud hut, a woman gives birth. The child born will be named Ruben. His father, Nyobe Nsunga, is a traditional priest, guardian of ancestral cults. His mother, Go Nonos, belongs to the Bassa people. The child doesn't know it yet, but he is born on land already bearing the scars of history. Cameroon is then a German protectorate, Cameroon with a K. Since 1884, the Germans have administered this territory, building roads and exploiting its resources. A few months later, far from here, a Serbian nationalist assassinates Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. Europe plunges into the First World War, and the fate of this small village lost in the mangroves is sealed with it. 1916. Ruben is 3 years old when the Germans surrender. The League of Nations, created after the war, decides the fate of the German colonies. Cameroon is divided. France takes 4/5 of the territory. England takes the rest, a narrow strip in the west. Theoretically, it wasn't colonization, it was a mandate. France was supposed to lead the population towards self-government, theoretically. In reality, on the ground, nothing changed for the Cameroonians. French administrators replaced the Germans. Same taxes, same forced labor, same contempt. The indigenous code now applied here. Cameroonians were subjects, not citizens. An administrator could punish them without trial for insolence. A district chief could send them to work sites hundreds of kilometers from home. Violence was legal, daily, commonplace. Little Ruben grew up in this world. But American Presbyterian missionaries had opened a school in the region. Against all odds, his father, a traditional priest, sent him there. The child learned to read and write. He discovered French, then English. He already spoke Bassa, his mother tongue. He would later learn Douala and Bulu. Languages are a passion, an appetite for him. The missionaries already notice his memory and intelligence. 1935. Ruben is 22 years old. He becomes a civil servant, first in the financial services in Douala, then as a clerk at the Yaoundé court, and later in Edea. The clerk is the one who records complaints, the one who records judgments. Every day, Ruben witnesses injustices. Cameroonians condemned for imaginary offenses. Administrators who laugh as they hand down sentences. Men torn from their families for logging camps because they haven't paid taxes. He sees the system laid bare. What he sees transforms him. Late 1930s. Nazi Germany is rising again and reclaiming its former colonies. The French governor Bruno wants to counter German propaganda. He creates the French Cameroonian Youth, JECAFRA, an organization for young Cameroonians intended to bind them to France. Ruben committed himself to it. There he learned to speak in public, to organize and structure his speeches. In 1939, he took the floor. We are fighting against Hitlerism because it is a tyranny, but that does not mean that we accept remaining a French colony forever. 1944. The Second World War ended. General de Gaulle convened the colonies in Brazzaville. They discussed the future. The answer was clear: no independence. Africa must remain French, evolving within the sphere of influence of the metropole. But in Yaoundé that year, a man arrived from France. Gaston Donat, a schoolteacher, trade unionist, and communist. He opened a Marxist study circle, a small room where Cameroonians and a few French people read banned books, discussed, and analyzed. Ruben joined this circle. For the first time in his life, he sits at a white man's table as an equal. Not as a servant, not as a subordinate, as a comrade. The circle becomes a breeding ground. From it will emerge the leaders of Cameroonian nationalism. 1945, France, to save face after the war, authorizes trade unions in the colonies. Cameroonians create the Union of Federated Trade Unions of Cameroon, the USCC. Ruben becomes its general secretary in 1947. He travels the country. He speaks to workers, cocoa farmers, and dock workers in Douala. He links social demands to political objective. He says, "We cannot demand better prices for cocoa without demanding independence. As long as France decides everything, nothing will truly change." Police reports are keeping an eye on him. In the archives, one reads, Nyobé is a dangerous element, very intelligent, honest, an exceptional organizer. He could transform the labor movement into a mass political movement. They are right. By the end of 1947, he is already seen as the natural leader. The one who can unite the discontent. The one who can transform anger into organization. In a bar in the Bassa district of Douala, a few men gathered discreetly. The bar is called Chez Sierra, one of those establishments where palm wine and cold beers are served in the shade of mango trees. They order beers, lower their voices. They come from the unions, the study groups, the youth movements. They talk about creating a movement, a real one. One that doesn't just demand reforms, one that demands independence. The reunification of the two Cameroons, social justice. The Union of the Peoples of Cameroon, UPC, was born. Ruben Um Nyobé was not there. He was under close surveillance by the colonial police. He was already too well known. In his place, less prominent figures like Léonard Boulay took over. The party declared itself the Cameroonian section of the African Democratic Rally, RDA, then allied with the French Communist Party. In the weeks that followed, word spread through the villages, the plantations, the neighborhoods. Something had been born. November 1948. The activists met again. This time, they elected Ruben Nyobé as General Secretary. He was 35 years old. He took the reins of a movement that still had neither premises nor a budget nor legal recognition, but he had ideas and a method. Ruben organized the party like an army. Grassroots committees in every village, every neighborhood. Local leaders trained, briefed, and monitored. Clandestine meetings when necessary. In just a few years, the UPC became the leading political force in Cameroon. 450 committees, tens of thousands of members. From north to south, from east to west, the party planted its flags. The program consisted of 3 points: national independence, immediate reunification of the two Cameroons, and social progress. Nothing more, nothing less. But Ruben looked further ahead. He had studied the documents. He knew that Cameroon was not legally a colony, but a territory under UN trusteeship. France was theoretically accountable. It was theoretically required to prepare the country for autonomy. So Ruben decided to exploit this loophole. He would take the fight where France could not ignore it, to New York, before the United Nations General Assembly. 1952. The first trip. To get there, you need money, a lot of money. Activists organize a public fundraising campaign. Bassa farmers sell part of their harvest. Merchants in Douala contribute. Women from Bowando weave and sell loincloths. Every franc counts. Every franc says, "We are with you." Ruben boards a ship. The crossing lasts several weeks. He arrives in New York, discovers the skyscrapers, the noise, the crowds. He has no elegant clothes, no tailored suit. He wears a simple suit, perhaps a little wrinkled from the journey, but when he takes the podium of the UN Fourth Committee on December 17, 1952, there is a hush. He said, "Cameroon is not a French colony, it is a trust territory. France has an obligation to lead us to independence. We demand that a deadline be set for this independence. We demand the immediate reunification of the two Cameroons." The delegates listen. The journalists take notes. The French delegation, however, pales. This man, this trade unionist from the bush, speaks better than they do. He knows the texts. He quotes the resolutions. He uses the law as a weapon. The return journey is a triumph. At the Ezeka train station, thousands of people await him. They sing, they dance, they cry. Ruben gets off the train, raises his hand. He simply says, "We have begun. This is only the beginning." 1953. Second journey. This time, France prepares its counterattack. It sends its own legitimate representatives to the UN. Cameroonians who have rallied to the cause, traditional chiefs, and pro-colonial notables. Douala Manga Bell, heir to a chieftaincy, takes the podium to declare that the UPC represents no one. Charles Okala, the future minister, asserts that Cameroonians want to remain French. But Ruben returns. He denounces French administration, the abuses, the forced labor, the lack of freedoms. He proposes a training program to train Cameroonian leaders to prepare the next generation. He speaks of landless peasants, workers without rights, and women without a voice. And when he finishes, part of the audience rises to applaud him. 1954, third trip. It's the same ritual, same platform, same speeches, same French hostility. Paris decides to send a man to Cameroon, a strong man, a man who has proven himself elsewhere. Roland Prey arrives in Douala at the end of 1954 with a suitcase full of convictions. He is a thin, wiry man with piercing eyes behind intellectual glasses. But the intellectual hides a beast. Prey has proven himself elsewhere, in other colonies, other posts where he has quelled rebellions, broken strikes, and silenced nationalists. Paris sent him here with a clear mission to put an end to the UPC. The instructions were oral. No written record mentions them. But Prey understood the message. France had just lost Indochina. Dien Bien Phu had been in May. Algeria was already burning. The empire was a fortress crumbling on all sides. There was no question of allowing a new front to open in Cameroon. No question of tolerating this Ruben Um Nyobé who took to the podium at the UN and moved the diplomats to tears. In his office at the Yaoundé residence, Prey unfolded a map of Cameroon. He drew circles around the Sanaga-Maritime region, around Douala, around the areas where the UPC was strongest. Then he summoned his subordinates and said, "I want reports on every militant. I want names, addresses, habits. I want to know where they sleep, where they eat, where they hide." The machine was set in motion. In the early months of 1955, UPC activists felt the noose tightening. Police checks multiplied. Searches became a daily occurrence. Officials were arrested for trivial reasons. A forgotten leaflet, an undeclared meeting, a sideways glance. At party headquarters in Douala, the police descended once a week, overturned filing cabinets, seized documents, and interrogated staff. Ruben continued to travel the country, but each trip was a race against time. He changed his route, used different cars, and slept at the homes of trusted activists. At night, in anonymous rooms, he wrote letters, prepared speeches, and received reports. His comrades saw him tired but never defeated. He said, "They want to push us into making a mistake. Let's not fall into the trap." But the trap, in fact, closed in a different way. On April 22, 1955, the UPC published a text that would change everything. It was called the Joint Proclamation. It was a manifesto, a call to action, an ultimatum. The text demanded the end of the trusteeship regime. It called for immediate elections by universal suffrage. It demanded independence, and above all, it announced that the UPC would organize peaceful demonstrations to make its voice heard. For Roland Prey, this was the last straw. He summoned his deputies and said, "They've crossed the line. Now we'll strike." The order circulated through police stations, barracks, and gendarmerie posts. They didn't speak of repression, they spoke of maintaining order. They didn't speak of killing, they spoke of dispersing the gatherings. But everyone understood the message. May 1955. The bloodiest month Cameroon had experienced since the beginning of colonization. In Douala, the demonstrations began on May 22nd. Thousands of people took to the streets of the New Bel, Bassa, and Deido neighborhoods. They held up signs, "Independence now," "Down with Roland Prey," "Long live the UPC." They sang anthems the police didn't know, songs in Bassa, Douala, and Iwondo. Women were at the forefront, babies strapped to their backs, their loincloths tied high to help them run faster. The police charged. Batons, tear gas, rifle butts. The demonstrators retreated, regrouped further away, and charged again. Around noon, the first shots rang out. The noise spreads like wildfire. They open fire. By the end of the day, dozens are dead. The bodies are taken away by families before the authorities can even count them. In courtyards, people dig graves, recite prayers, and swear revenge. In Yaoundé, it's even worse. On May 23rd, a crowd gathers in front of the High Commissioner's residence. Young people, especially agitated and angry, throw stones and shout insults. The soldiers of the Royal Guard, Cameroonians under French command, are ordered to fire into the air to disperse the crowd. But firing into the air isn't enough, so they fire into the throng. A witness would later recount, bodies were falling like ripe fruit. There was blood everywhere on the asphalt. People were running in all directions, but there was nowhere to go. The soldiers were firing, reloading, and then firing again. The official death toll was 25 in Douala and about 30 in Yaoundé. Nationalist sources, however, spoke of hundreds, even thousands. The truth, as is often the case in colonial wars, remains buried in mass graves and traumatized memories. In Kongsamba, Loum, and Edea, in every town where the UPC was established, the clashes continued. France deployed additional troops. Planes flew over the neighborhoods, helicopters strafed the rooftops. The country was under siege, though the word was never uttered. During these days of madness, Ruben Nyobé hid somewhere in the Sanaga-Maritime forest. Messengers brought him news, bad, worse than ever. He listened, his face grim, then gave instructions. Tell people not to respond to violence with violence. We are not ready. We have no weapons. If we fight now, they will crush us. But in the cities, his instructions didn't reach them in time. The machine was already in motion. On July 13, 1955, the French government signed the Decree of Dissolution. The UPC was officially banned. Its affiliated organizations were also banned, the UDFEC, the Democratic Union of Cameroonian Women, and the JDC, the Democratic Youth of Cameroon. Their offices were closed, their assets confiscated, and their bank accounts frozen. In the weeks that followed, a manhunt ensued. The most prominent activists were arrested, imprisoned, and tortured. The others fled. Some crossed the border into British Cameroon, others into the Congo, and still others into France, hoping to disappear. The historical leaders scattered. Félix Moumié, Abel Kingié, and Ernest Ouandié went into exile. They went to Cairo, Conakry, and Accra, where other independent African leaders offered them a helping hand. From there, they continued the struggle through radio broadcasts, leaflets, and secret missions. Ruben, however, made a different choice. He stayed. He stayed because the Sanaga-Maritime region was his home, because the Bassa people, his people, were there. Because leaving would mean abandoning those who had followed him, those who had contributed to his trips to the UN, those who had hidden activists in their homes. He stayed and went underground. For the first few days, he hid with relatives and childhood friends. But he quickly realizes that this isn't enough. The police are lurking, informants are everywhere, and the rewards offered for his capture are the envy of many poor men. So he ventures deeper into the heart of the forest, where the roads end and only the initiated know the trails. He first settles in Mpodol, a remote hamlet on the banks of a river. Then he moves on, changing camps every week, sometimes every night. He sleeps on mats, eats cassava and game meat, and drinks water from the streams. Meanwhile, Roland Prey believes he has won. He sends triumphant reports to Paris. The UPC has been decapitated. Its leaders are either on the run or in prison. Calm has returned to the territories. He is wrong. The Sanaga-Maritime forest stretches across thousands of hectares. a green ocean where centuries-old kapok trees pierce the canopy with their immense branches. Beneath this canopy, sunlight filters in fine golden drops. The ground is a sponge of dead leaves, tangled roots, and black mud that absorbs every footstep. It is here that Ruben Um Nyobé chose to live. He is given the nickname Mpodol, which in the Bassa language means spokesperson, the one who speaks the truth. The year is 1956. Ruben is 43 years old. For almost a year, he hasn't slept in a bed, eaten at a table, or seen a clear sky without fearing a reconnaissance plane. His skin has taken on the color of bark, his feet have hardened on the trails, his eyes have grown accustomed to piercing the darkness under the canopy of trees. He walks for hours without tiring, stopping at the edge of streams to drink from the cup of his hand. His headquarters, if it can be called that, is near Mpodol. It is a secluded clearing hidden by thick bushes where a few makeshift shelters have been built with branches and raffia leaves. Rain seeps through the roof when it falls too heavily. The wind makes the storm lanterns flicker. But it is here that the fate of a nation is decided. Around him, a handful of men and women share his clandestine existence. Pierre Yembak, his secretary, a discreet intellectual who commits the leader's thoughts to paper. Ruth Go Khan, his mother-in-law, a strong woman who prepares food, tends to the wounded, and relays messages. Mark Gambi, his cook, a devoted young man who hunts and gathers to feed the camp. And a few guards, peasants armed with hunting rifles, stand watch day and night. But the encampment is just a dot on a vast map. Around it, hundreds of villages, thousands of peasants, an entire population supporting Mpodol. In every hut, everyone knows his name. In every family, they hide a militant. In every field, they cultivate a little more to feed those in the forest. Ruben organizes this support with clockwork precision. Clandestine committees exist in every village. Local leaders report the news to him: troop movements, arrests, denunciations. Liaison agents roam the forest day and night, carrying messages written on rice paper, folded into tiny rectangles, sewn into the hem of a loincloth, or hidden in a cassava cake. And then there are the nights. The nights when Ruben leaves the forest to meet with the villagers. He arrives after sunset, silent as a cat. The elders gather in a hut, away from prying eyes. An oil lamp is lit, voices lowered. Ruben listens to their problems. An excessive tax, a relative arrested, a field confiscated. He offers advice, settles disputes, comforts the afflicted. Before dawn, he returns to the forest, swallowed by the darkness. This is how a parallel state is born. A state without borders, without a capital, without a regular army. But a state that issues its own documents. Cameroonian identity cards printed clandestinely, distributed under the table. Birth certificates for children whom the colonial administration refuses to register. Marriage certificates, celebrated according to traditional rites, far from the churches and town halls controlled by the whites. The French administration in Yaoundé is tearing its hair out. The reports kept coming. Nyobé's influence remains paramount in the region. The people obey him more than they obey us. UPC committees continue to operate despite the ban. We no longer control the territory. Roland Pré, the High Commissioner, read these reports and clenched his fists. He had promised Paris that he would eradicate the UPC in a few months. More than a year had passed, and the terrorist was still at large. Worse, he was organizing, structuring, and consolidating his power. So Pré shifted into high gear. December 1956. In a remote encampment, Ruben received a delegation of activists from Douala. They were young, agitated, and determined. They said, "We must strike. We must show that we exist. The legislative elections are coming, and the administration is preparing a charade. We must boycott, sabotage, and prevent this sham." Ruben listened, then remained silent for a long time. He strokes his chin, looks at the flames of the campfire. Then he speaks. He says that violence has never been his choice. He says that the UN is still a possible platform. He says that France will eventually give in if international pressure intensifies. The young people insist. They say that the UN has done nothing, that the resolutions are just words, that France only speaks the language of force. The discussion lasts for hours. At dawn, Ruben gives in. He agrees to the creation of an armed wing. It will be called the National Organizing Committee, the CNO. Its primary mission, to organize the boycott of the December 1956 elections. To prevent the polling stations from opening, to discourage voters from going to the polls. To show that the UPC is not dead. The CNO is not a regular army. These are young men from the villages, hunters who know the forest, peasants fed up with taxes and forced labor. Their weapons, hunting rifles, machetes, clubs. Sometimes they recover weapons stolen from gendarmerie posts or buy them from compliant soldiers, but most of the time, they have only their courage and their faith. The elections took place on December 23, 1956. In the Sanaga-Maritime region, it was a disaster for the administration. Polling stations remained closed due to a lack of voters. Ballot boxes were burned. Poll workers were confined to their homes by vigilance committees. Voter turnout was negligible. France cried foul, accusing the country of intimidation, terror, and chaos. But in the villages, the truth was known. People had chosen not to vote because Ruben had asked them not to. 1957. France changes its strategy. Roland Pré is recalled, but his successor continues the same mission. A man arrives on the scene, a colonel named Jean Lamberton. He served in Indochina. He saw how to pacify a rebellious population. He will apply the same methods in Cameroon. Lamberton establishes the pacification zone in Sanaga-Maritime, the ZOPAC. Behind this technical name lies a terrifying machine. First measure, forced relocations. The French army orders entire villages to leave their ancestral lands and settle in guarded camps. These camps, the peasants call them regroupment villages. They are surrounded by wooden palisades, topped with watchtowers where soldiers stand guard day and night. No one can enter or leave without authorization. The fields are far away, the crops rot in the fields. Hunger begins to gnaw at their stomachs. Second measure, the systematic clearing of the forest. Columns of soldiers roam the bush, burning suspicious encampments, destroying crops, and poisoning water sources. Helicopters fly over the canopy, strafing indiscriminately as soon as any movement is detected. Planes drop napalm on entire areas, turning the forest into a blazing inferno. Third measure, terror. Prisoners are tortured to extract information. Mutilated bodies are displayed at the entrances of villages to deter anyone who might want to help the resistance fighters. Severed heads are impaled on pikes along the roads for all to see. A French military report, written at the time, describes these methods in terrifying detail. The display of the heads of slain rebels has a considerable psychological effect on the population. They understand the fate that awaits them if they continue to collaborate with the outlaws. In the forest, Ruben learns of these atrocities from survivors who manage to reach him. He listens to their stories, his face grim, his fists clenched. Sometimes at night, he weeps silently, but in the morning, he gets up and carries on. October 1957. A glimmer of hope appears from an unexpected place. Bishop Thomas Mungo of Douala offers to mediate. He is a respected man, a prince of the church, but also a Cameroonian who suffers to see his country torn apart. He obtains safe passage from the French authorities to meet Ruben. The meeting takes place in a village in the forest one October evening. The bishop arrives in a white cassock, preceded by two priests. Ruben emerges from the shadows, dressed in a worn shirt, his face gaunt from months in hiding. The two men sit facing each other under a shelter of branches. Bishop Mungo speaks first. He says that France is ready to negotiate, that Ruben could leave the bush without being harassed, that he could even participate in legal political life if the UPC agrees to lay down its arms. Ruben listens, then replies. His voice is calm but firm. He says, "Your Excellency, I am not fighting for myself. I am fighting for my people, for those in the regroupment camps, for those who saw their villages burn, for those who lost fathers, mothers, and children. I will not leave without guarantees." He listed his conditions: total amnesty for all activists, repeal of the decree dissolving the UPC, recognition of the right to independence, establishment of a timetable for the departure of the French. The bishop transmitted these conditions to Yaoundé. The response took several days to arrive. When it did, it was unequivocal. France would not negotiate with terrorists. The UPC remained banned. Ruben Um Nyobé remained an outlaw. Mediation had failed. The pacification efforts continued. Early 1958, the noose tightened. Ruben's camps were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Food was running low. So were medicines. Several of his companions had been captured, tortured, and executed. Others had joined the administration, exhausted, discouraged, or bribed. Theodore Mai Matip, one of his closest collaborators, began to show signs of weariness. He speaks of negotiation, compromise, surrender. Ruben looks at him sadly but says nothing. He knows the pressure is enormous. He knows not everyone will hold out. Yet he holds out. He holds out because he still believes. Because messages are arriving from other regions, other countries, other continents. Nkrumah's Ghana has been independent since 1957. Sékou Touré's Guinea will soon become so. The wave is sweeping across Africa. One day, it will reach Cameroon. But on that day, he must be there. He must survive. In his notebook, the one he carries everywhere, the one he hides under his shirt at night, he writes down dreams, dreams of freedom, of justice, of dignity. Dreams where his country rises again, where children learn history, where blacks and whites speak to each other as equals. Sometimes, he rereads these notebooks by the light of a hurricane lamp, and he weeps. Summer 1958. The hunt intensifies. French soldiers have turned villagers against him. Bounties are offered, 100,000 francs for whoever reveals their hiding place. It's a fortune for a peasant. Ruben's companions fall one by one. Esther Gomangele, head of the UDFEC, is captured in early September. She is a strong-willed woman, an organizer, a confidant. The soldiers torture her for hours. At first, she doesn't speak. Then her body releases what her will had been holding back. She gives a name, a place, a direction. In the forest, Ruben senses the danger. He changes camps almost every night. But the soldiers are everywhere. Helicopters constantly fly overhead. Dogs sniff the trails. The forest, his ally, becomes a prison. On September 9, 1958, resistance fighters are captured near Libolingoy. Under torture, they confirm what the French suspect. Mpodol is in the area. The command decides to launch a massive operation. On the morning of September 13, 1958, the Sanaga-Maritime forest was shrouded in a fine drizzle. The leaves of the kapok trees dripped, the ground a liquid mud into which every step sank. Near the village of Libolingoy, a small group of men and women awoke in a makeshift camp. They had spent the night sheltered under raffia tarpaulins, huddled together against the damp cold. Ruben Um Nyobé was there. He was 45 years old. For 3 years, he had lived in this forest. His face had become gaunt, his temples grayed, but his eyes retained the calm gleam that all who knew him described. This morning he was tired. Food was beginning to run out. The messages reaching him are becoming increasingly rare, increasingly alarming. Around him are his last companions, Pierre Yem Bak, his faithful secretary, the one who commits his thoughts to paper, Ruth Go Kon, his mother-in-law, a woman in her 60s, as strong as an iroko tree, who refuses to abandon him, Jean-Marc Gambi, the cook, a devoted young man, and a few others, tired, hungry, but still there. A few kilometers away, a column of French soldiers sets off. There are dozens of them, divided into 3 sections. They are guided by local trackers, Cameroonians who have joined the administration, men who know the forest as well as he does. At the head of the column, one name keeps recurring in the reports. Luc Macon, a bitter adversary, a personal enemy. The column advances in silence. The soldiers have received fresh intelligence obtained under torture a few days earlier. They know where Mpodol is. They know how to reach him. In the camp, the morning passes slowly. Ruben writes in his notebook, as he does every day. Notes, reflections, dreams. Sometimes he rereads old passages, those from his glory days, from his trips to New York, from the rallies where crowds cheered him. He never shows these notebooks to anyone. They are his secret garden, his dialogue with himself. Around 10 o'clock, a strange noise pierces the murmur of the forest. The sound of breaking branches, too regular to be that of an animal. The guards strain to hear. Ruben raises his head, hurriedly puts his notebooks in his leather briefcase, the one he never leaves behind. He says, "They're coming. We have to leave." They get up, gather what they can, and plunge into the vegetation. But they are slow, weakened by weeks of deprivation. Behind them, the sounds grew louder. A few minutes later, the French column burst into the empty camp. The soldiers inspected the shelters, turned over the sleeping mats, and found scraps of food still warm. Captain Holin, in command of the operation, looked around and said, "They're not far. Catch them." The hunt began. Ruben and his companions ran, stumbled, and got back up. The forest, usually so protective, had become a trap. Vines caught them, roots tripped them up, and streams slowed their progress. Behind them, the soldiers gained ground. Suddenly, a break in the clouds, a small backwater, a stretch of muddy water bordered by vegetation. Ruben stops, breathes, looks around. He has no weapon. He, the terrorist France has been hunting for 3 years, never carries a weapon. Only his briefcase, only his notebooks, only his dreams. That's when the soldiers appeared. Ruben Um Nyobé didn't surrender. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't beg. He turned his back and tried to wade into the stream, to cross the water to reach the other bank. A Chadian conscript, a French soldier named Sarah Abdoulaye, raised his submachine gun. He aimed and fired. The bullets struck Ruben in the back. Several, A burst of gunfire that ripped through him threw him forward and knocked him into the muddy water of the stream. He collapsed, his head in the mud, his briefcase floating beside him. Nearby, Pierre Yembak also fell, struck by the same bullets. Ruth Gokon, his mother-in-law, collapsed. Jean-Marc Gambi, the cook, was shot dead as he tried to run. In a matter of seconds, the small group was decimated. Only Theodore May Matip, who had been showing signs of weariness in recent months, managed to escape. He plunged into the vegetation, disappeared, and survived. Later, some would accuse him of complicity, others would say he was lucky. The soldiers approached the bodies. They turned over Ruben's. His face was already covered in mud, unrecognizable. One of the soldiers picked up the towel, opened it, and found the notebooks. He handed them to Captain Hollen. The captain quickly flipped through them, saw writing, dates, names. He said, "Keep this. It might be useful." Then he gave an order that would not appear in any official report but which collective memory has retained. Drag him. The soldiers tied Ruben Nyobé's body down and dragged it along with ropes. For kilometers on muddy tracks, the body was pulled. The skin tore on the roots, on the stones. The face became a wound. The bones broke. When the convoy arrived at the village of Lyon, what remained of Ruben Nyobé was a shapeless, bloodied mass, unrecognizable even to his relatives. The authorities decided to display it. In Bumnyebel, his native village, the body was shown to the people. "Here," the soldiers said, "this is what remains of your hero. Look, touch, remember." But the villagers watched in silence, and in that silence, something happened. A transmission, a memory etched into their minds. On September 15, 1958, 2 days after the assassination, the French authorities made a final decision. Ruben Nyobé's body was not to become a place of pilgrimage. He must not rest in a grave where nationalists will come to pay their respects. So they encase him in a block of concrete. In Eseka, at a secret location, workers prepare cement, pour a slab, and bury the disfigured body. When the concrete dries, nothing remains. Just a gray, anonymous, mute mass. The man who spoke at the United Nations, the man who had made Roland Prey tremble, the man whom thousands of Cameroonians called Mpodol, has become a thing. A thing without a name, without a face, without a grave. France believes it has won. On January 1, 1960, Cameroon proclaims its independence. But it is not the independence that Ruben Nyobé had dreamed of. It is not the one for which he died. In the stands of the Yaoundé Stadium that day, Amadou Ahidjo delivers a speech. He speaks of peace, unity, and development. He doesn't speak of Ruben. He doesn't speak of the thousands of dead in the Sanaga-Maritime region. He doesn't speak of the burned villages, the regroupment camps, or the torture. France, through Pierre Mesmer, would later explain the strategy. We granted independence to those who had least demanded it, after having eliminated the most intransigent nationalists. The cooperation agreement signed the same day allowed the French army to remain. The soldiers continued the pacification efforts, this time in Bamileke country, where Ernest Wandier had taken up the mantle. The war would last until 1971. Meanwhile, the name Ruben Nyobé became taboo. To pronounce it in public was to expose oneself to the political police, the CNR, National Intelligence Service, and the Mobile Mixed Brigade. To possess his writings was an act of subversion. To cite his example is a call to rebellion. School textbooks ignore him, official monuments snub him. The UPC archives are burned. The survivors of the resistance remain silent, out of fear, caution, and exhaustion. For 30 years, the memory of Ruben Nyobé survives in secrecy. During evening gatherings, the elders recount his story in hushed tones in Bassa so that the children won't understand. In lullabies, women sing his name, disguised in metaphors. In books published in exile, writers like Mongo Betty pay tribute to him. Remember Ruben is the title of one of his novels. Remember. 1991. A wind of democratization is blowing across Africa. The Berlin Wall has fallen. The Cold War is ending. Everywhere, authoritarian regimes are faltering. In Cameroon, Paul Biya, who succeeded Ahidjo in 1982, feels the ground shaking beneath his feet. Riots break out, demonstrations, ghost towns. The people are demanding change, so Biya makes a gesture. On December 16, 1991, he promulgates Law No. 91-022, a rehabilitation law. Ruben Um Nyobé, Felix Moumié, and Ernest Ouandié are officially recognized as figures who worked for the birth of national sentiment and the independence of Cameroon. But the law adds another name to the same list, Amadou Ahidjo. The very same man who succeeded the French, who continued the repression, who had the last resistance fighters executed. Placing Ahidjo alongside Ruben is a political sleight of hand. A way to neutralize memory, to dilute heroism, to say that everyone is equal. The martyrs' families accept it nonetheless. After 30 years of silence, it's better than nothing. After 30 years of forced oblivion, it's a form of recognition, imperfect, ambiguous, but recognition nonetheless. 2007, June 22nd. In Ezeka, a crowd gathers. Thousands of people have come from all over the country, from all over the region. A monument to the memory of Ruben Um Nyobé is being inaugurated. The statue is 6 meters high. It depicts Ruben getting off a train at the Ezeka station in 1952. It's the image of his triumphant return after his first speech at the UN. He raises his hand, greets the crowd, and smiles. The government is not officially represented. No ministers have made the trip. Speeches are given. Songs are sung, prayers are recited, but the absence of the central government speaks volumes. It speaks to Cameroon's difficulty in confronting its history. Today, Ruben Um Nyobé is a name that school children encounter in their textbooks, in passing, a line, sometimes two, nationalist figure assassinated in 1958. No details about the circumstances, no mention of the French army's role. No explanation about the concrete, the napkin, the notebooks. Yet, in popular culture, he lives on. In 2019, the singer Blick Bassi released an album titled 1958. Songs in Bassa that recount the story, the pain, the pride. Novelists like Max Loeb and Hemley Boom write about this buried memory, attempting to fill what one of them calls the memory gap of decolonization. Among younger generations, his name circulates. On social media, in political debates, in moments of anger against those in power. He has become an icon, a symbol, a rallying cry. Those who invoke him don't always know everything about him, but they know one thing. He didn't bend, he didn't betray. He died standing tall, even though bullets struck him in the back. Ruben Um Nyobé still rests somewhere beneath the concrete of Ezeka. No one has ever found the exact spot. Perhaps no one is looking anymore. Perhaps the slab has been covered over by other buildings, other roads, other acts of forgetfulness. But his notebooks, the ones he held in his briefcase the day he died, the ones where he wrote down his dreams by the light of his hurricane lamps, those have survived. Historians have found them, studied them, published them. They can be read today. In one of them are these lines written a few months before his death. "When I am no longer here, others will come. The struggle belongs to no one." It is like the river, it continues to flow even when it is not seen. They can encase my body in concrete. They cannot sink the idea for which I fight. This idea resides in the mind of every Cameroonian who dreams of dignity. It resides in the heart of every African who refuses to bow down. It is on the lips of those who one day will pronounce my name without fear. That day has come. His name is spoken. His memory is passed on, and the river continues to flow.